Greetings, traveler. Today we're taking a look at a comment made by a traveler called the Dawn Machine 8608. He is 30 years old and he's an engineer at a large firm. He's actually a project director, so I guess he has a pretty nice position there. His question is, how can he quit this current job he has, because it's really not what he wants to be doing, it seems, and become a solo game dev? So this is a complicated question. I think many people out there have similar thoughts that want to get into game development. So today what I'm going to do is tell you what I did when I was in a similar situation and wanted to switch to my current position or job, I suppose. And then I'm going to give you a two-step framework for how I would go about making this switch from a full-time job to a solo indie if I were to do it all over again. So my name is Xanthos. I've been working in the games industry for over 13 years now. And back when I was working in big game companies like Electronic Arts or Tri-Ace or DMM and so on, I was already making games, right? I was already doing what I loved doing. However, I realized that big companies just have their own way of doing things and they have their own focus. And it took me way too long to realize, almost 10 years or so, that really that wasn't for me. I had my own things that I wanted to work on, and I had to find a way to make that reality. So today we're only going to discuss one challenge of this situation, and that is money. How do you get enough money to be able to make whatever games it is you want and have a long enough runway to develop them, test them, polish them enough to present them to the public and hopefully delight them and have them request to buy it? So what did I do? I was working at this company, and I thought, this is enough for me. I'm ready to venture out on my own, but I wanted to have the runway to be able to try many things as a game developer and fail as much as possible in a safe environment, which I think is the key here. So what I did was this. I negotiated with my company back then to switch from a full-time employee to a contractor. Now, this is a very backwards thing to do because most people start as contractors and they want to end up being full-time employees at some big safe company. That wasn't for me. I essentially gave the company the option they wanted, because companies don't want full-time employees because they're a bigger responsibility. They would rather have contractors that they can terminate the contract with basically at any given time. At least that's the situation here in Japan. So I asked them if it would be okay with them to turn my contract from a full-time employment to contract, and they were more than happy to do so. In fact, they would even throw in a bonus to the payment because they would have so many fewer things to worry about. So how long I would stay with the company, all sorts of insurance stuff. So they were more than willing to even give me a salary bump with the change to the contract. So with that, I was essentially staying at my current job. I was doing what I was always doing at that company, but I was my own entity. So that meant I could talk to other companies at the same time and get more projects similar to the one I was doing for my original company. So here, I think what many people don't realize is this process sounds complicated, but it is absurdly easy. It's so easy that probably everybody who's listening to this has done it already in their lives. What is this process? So as I continued to be working for my original company remotely from now on, since I was my own entity and I could set my own rules, I would simply go and do what you call traditional interviews. I would go to other companies and say, hey, you have a position open for so-and-so. I'm interested to take the interview. And after the interview, they would give me an offer. And I would say, okay, that's a good offer. Can I accept it as a freelance or as my own company or whatever your situation is? And they might say yes, and they might say no. Usually, in my experience, most companies are completely okay with it, because the difficult thing here is to find someone skilled enough to do the required role. So if it's a digital job like game development, being physically there, I know many companies like it, but it's not strictly necessary. you could get away with a once per week in the office or a once per week face-to-face meeting or something like that. So in that sense, I went from having one full-time job that could pay one salary to any number of parallel, essentially full-time jobs that paid each its own salary. And now the limit becomes, how much your capacity is for extra work, how quickly you can finish tasks, and so on. So why did I do all this? I realized that I needed this runway, right, to be able to develop my own game, test it like crazy, not have to worry about deadlines like I spoke in previous videos. I really wanted this creative freedom that I never felt I had when I was working at a big company. So I took a few of those projects, I worked really hard at those for a while, and I built what we call a war chest. So I built an amount of money that would get me a certain runway, something that I felt comfortable with. So when I had that, I finally switched to full-on developer mode, and I could focus on that. So that is how I did it. If you have specific questions about this process or legal or contract stuff, I can do what I can to answer. But let's switch to what I would do if I were now working at a big company and I wanted to become a solo game dev anew. What would I do? Well, the simplest way to go about it is, while still being in that big company, start planning ahead. Start planning for what your runway is going to look like and how you can achieve it. So typically, I would aim for 2 to 3 years of a war chest, so to speak. So an amount of money at the bank or whatever that's enough to pay my rent and all my living expenses for at least 2 or 3 years, even if I wasn't working at the time. So that is something that's easier to do when you're employed than if you're not employed, right? So while I would be still at the big company, I would start collecting that money. Now, there's many things you can do to make this process go faster, right? The process of accumulating that war chest. Moving to a different area, living with your parents if that's possible, living with your girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. Anything is possible. It all depends on what you're comfortable with and how quickly you want to jump to this process. So this is part of a two-step process, and this is step one, the planning phase, as I would call it. So while you're working at that big company, you start accumulating your war chest that will define how long your runway is when you become a full-on solo indie game dev. During this process, as you're accumulating money, still in step one, that is an excellent time to start thinking about what game you want to make and how you want to make it. So this is very different from the actual development process, because here you're not trying to make something polished or good. You're simply trying to decide what it is you want to make. Something that helps a lot in this process is that, well, sometimes when you're developing a product for a market like a shampoo or a soap or a car or whatever, you have to check if the product fits the market. So if there's a need for this kind of product. I would talk about this in video games, but really looking around the video games market and looking at successful video games, there is so many crazy examples out there. There's games about literally the craziest things you can think about. And I'm talking about the successful ones as well. So based on my experience, the theme of the game, the topic of the game is not nearly as important as the polish of the game and how well it plays, right? How well it teaches the player the mechanics, how the progression is throughout the game, if the ending is fun, and if all the mechanics deliver the theme that you want to convey to the user, and so on. So these things are much more important than the type of the game itself. And this is to say that here in step one, while you're still planning what game you want to make, when you're in the runway period, you have a lot of freedom. So decide that, look around at what engines there are out there for game development, see which one fits you best. Take the time to research all these things in your weekends and your late nights after work. And once you reach that stage where you know what you want to make, and you have at least 2 or 3 years worth of war chest for your runway, then you can switch to step 2. So in step 2, you already know what you're making, and you already know that you have, let's say, 2 or 3 years to make it. So I'm not going to talk about the development process because this really depends on exactly what it is you want to make. But I will say what the goal of this second step is. The goal of the second step is to make enough money with your own game to be able to sustain yourself for the foreseeable future. Now, this is easily said, but this is actually where most game studios fail. So, what can you do to make sure it doesn't fail? First of all, the biggest safeguard you can have for this situation is when you're reaching the end of the runway, let's say you're about 6 months from all your money running out, all the war chest being depleted. If really you think there's just no hope of the game making enough money to sustain you, then that's when you can start doing interviews again and return to your previous job. And if someone asks, what were you doing in this 2-year gap or whatever, you can say I was developing my own software product, and you even have something to show for it. So it shouldn't be too much of an issue, especially if you're an engineer, to jump right back into the traditional market. But a far more interesting possibility is how you could start making money with your own project, right? And since we're talking about a solo indie game dev, we're not talking about crazy big, AAA console titles. We're talking about the most grassroots situation possible. So I have actually made a video specifically about this, how you can start thinking about your game, start thinking about the sales, taking the first steps and slowly escalating it up and taking it all the way to you can have some income, which can turn into more of an income, which can turn into a more fleshed out product that people buy for a higher price. And through that development, how you can improve the product or create subsequent products. So in this case, game 1, game 2, game 3, and so on, that already has an existing audience, that you know that audience very, very well, and what they're willing to pay for the features the game offers. And hopefully through that, your road ahead is, if not guaranteed, at least clear. So I will link this video below, so please let me know what you think. Again, thank you so much for the question. I hope this is relevant to you and at least one more person out there. I hope my experience is of benefit to you. Thank you so much for your time, and as always, have fun.